Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast with your usual host, Federico Plantera, journalist, sociologist, researcher. Today, getting back to a topic that we already actually addressed and announced and introduced last year because of last year's edition, because exactly, again, in 2024, there is the Tallinn Cyber Diplomacy Summer School. Of course, like the irony could be interesting in the fact that we are talking about it basically in the beginning of November. But still, the summer school is here, is back. And last year, we talked about it with Tanel Sepp, the ambassador at large for cybersecurity at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia. This year, we have two former participants who instead returned this year as speakers. They are, first of all, the ambassador, advisor on cyber matters at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Dominican Republic, Claudio Peguero. Claudio, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, and hello to everyone.
We also have joining us from France, Alban Andreu, who is the policy officer at the Strategic Affairs and Cybersecurity Department of the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. Alban, welcome to you to the podcast as well.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Let's start from the past. In the sense, this year you're going to be speaking at the summer school, but I'm sure that everybody who's, for example, also maybe thinking or considering of attending in other editions would like to have a little bit of user experience review, let's call it this way. Claudio, in your case, how has it been your experience with the summer school so far?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a great experience because there are not many events tailored specifically at cyber diplomacy in the way that this school is crafted. So there are other initiatives that we have from UNIDIR, OAS, and others. But I think that what makes the Tallinn Summer Cyber Diplomacy School unique is that I always say that all these events, meetings, be it trainings, workshops, conferences, whatever it is, I think that one of the greatest values of bringing people together is not necessarily what you learn. You always learn something new. There is always something that you can take back home and adapt to your ecosystem. But I think the greatest value of it is the networking, is being able to interact with people. And what the Tallinn Summer Cyber Diplomacy School does great is the networking part. I think the program, even though many might find it to be intense in terms of the how many hours per day we are in the event, whether it's formal or informal gathering, but it is really from early in the morning into late at night. But that way, I think we make that networking way more effective because there's also contents into that networking. But for me, I think it's been very useful. I've made some new friends when I attended, and I think that was useful in the development of our further work, for example, at the OEWG in the UN, because it made us be able to connect and maybe find, even help us try and find consensus on issues. And so I think that's the magic behind the Tallinn Summer Cyber Diplomacy School is that.
I would say intensive. Let's call it intensive. Right, intensive, from intense to intensive. But it does feel then a little bit like a small period of back to school, let's say. First of all, because obviously there has to be constant learning, especially in the field of like digital policy, whichever the domain is. Especially, I would say, due to the contingency in cybersecurity, considering that in the past months and most recent years, we've seen how cybersecurity threats and incidents have actually ramped up, which means that obviously like governments have to be ever so aware, but also ever so ready, coming to the topic of capacity building, to counter these threats. Alban, I would like instead to have your take on the same thing, in the sense, do you agree with the fact that basically the networking aspect of it is I would say paradoxically in terms of the words used, but also the thing you take home.
Thank you, Federico. Yes, I do agree. The group dynamic that we had in Tallinn last year, and I am sure that the colleagues will have this year, that group dynamic was really nice because that made a lot of good memories and created links. But it was also quite productive because indeed those links are also very useful then in our day-to-day work, as the ambassador pointed out, in terms of having those relationships and those channels open. But I must say that the intensive agenda and the back-to-school vibe was actually quite good for me as well, because last year I had just started on the topic of cyber diplomacy at the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. And so to me, that full week of getting to know all the dimensions of cybersecurity, being threats or norms, international law, all of that which is in the program of this intensive week was very, very good, very valuable introduction to the whole range of cyber diplomacy.
Indeed, the Tallinn Cyber Diplomacy Summer School lasts basically about 4 days and a half. 4 days and a half, where 4 are full of activities, and on the last day, there is also like a workshop. In the meantime, in any case, sessions, talks, conversations, discussions, and also inputs from previous participants, like in today's case, on a wide-ranging series of topics that are relevant at the moment in cyber diplomacy. So it starts, for example, with the foundations, let's say, and the context and the evolution of the emerging technologies. So, for example, including artificial intelligence in the context of cyber diplomacy into the picture. What are you going to talk about this year's Tallinn Cyber Diplomacy Summer School? I would start with the ambassador and then again to Alban.
We'll be discussing is, first of all, the need for the cyber diplomats. Why do we need to have in our MFAs? Why do we need to have this cyber diplomacy function? Why would we need a dedicated cyber unit? Why would we need a cyber ambassador? What's the connection between the cyber world, the cybersecurity, and other aspects of what I like to call the cyber ecosystem? What's the connection with the diplomacy? And also, what's the right mix? I remember when we started discussing cybercrime, and I think probably all states worked first on cybercrime, and then we started working on cybersecurity, CSIRTs, and so on. There was the question back then, who do we need? What's the profile? Who do we need to be the cybercrime investigator? Is it a tech guy that will teach how to investigate? Is it a criminal investigator, law enforcement officer that will teach about the technology behind it? And now the discussion also comes to this arena. And I think it is this function is for diplomats. So we should teach diplomats what they need to know about cyber, about the ecosystem. You don't need to be a tech guy. You don't need to, if we use the metaphor of a car, if you buy a car, you need to know that you have to put gas into the car. You need to know that you have to check the air in the tires, and you drive the car, and you then do some basic maintenance stuff, and you have to take it to the shop to change the oil and so on. But you don't need to lift up the hood and fix the car if it breaks. If it breaks, you take it to the mechanic, you take it to the shop. So it's the same. We need to teach diplomats enough so that they understand the international implications of this. How do we work with an incident? How do we come about attribution? What do we do for attribution of an attack, for example? What's the implication? It is easier to teach a diplomat that already has a background in, say, international law, these elements of the cyber world, than teaching a tech guy. And then take my word for it, because that is my professional background. I'm a systems engineer. It is far easier than teaching this tech guy international law, so which is far more complicated for us, especially because engineering is very square and straightforward. So again, that's part of the discussions I think we will be having in that session.
Very interesting. And you also made me think of a range of, the ambassador mentioned a series of topics, basically. One of them, for example, I remember that of attribution of the cyber attacks is also something that we have addressed on this podcast series with Merle Maigre, actually, the senior expert at the Governance Academy, who's also the head of the Competence Center on Cybersecurity, and I guess is also moderating the day 4 of the summer school program. Alban, you instead are speaking on day 2. At least according to the list. So, what are you instead going to address?
Well, I will talk about nothing less than how do we collectively organize the global discussion and action of cybersecurity. So it's quite a topic. So I might need to do some history, some flashback. Cyber issues at the UN have been discussed for now over 25 years. And over those 25 years, the discussion has been organized around time-limited working groups, the GGEs and the OEWGs. Those groups were very useful in consolidating the UN framework for responsible state behavior, which is a normative framework that has been endorsed by consensus by all member states of the UN that comprise international law, voluntary norms, and other dimensions that give us a framework of responsible state behavior. And in that context, there has been, since 2020, discussions around a cross-regional proposal for a UN program of action on cyber security and ICT security. So the program of action, or POA, the idea is to have a mechanism that would be permanent, so that would give us stability. We wouldn't have time-limited groups with mandates that need to be renegotiated every few years, but instead we would have stability for the discussions at the multilateral level. And also there would be an emphasis, a focus on giving states the capacities to implement that normative framework of state behavior. So that POA proposal has been discussed and elaborated in a cross-regional way since 2020. Now it's been quite a few years. And it has allowed a lot of progress at the current OEWG at the UN. So, for example, in the last annual progress report that was negotiated in July 2024, there was consensus agreement on a few key elements of the future mechanism, because something that the students of the Tallinn school will learn is that the OEWG, its mandate is going to conclude in July 2025. So the whole UN membership needs to discuss and agree on the future mechanism that will succeed that OEWG. And so the POA is the most advanced proposal in that sense of how do we make sure that the priorities that are shared by all member states, and especially I think capacity building to implement the framework that's been in the discussions that the ambassador and I we attend when we go to the UN. That's something that we hear a lot from a lot of delegations, and so that will be one of the top priorities of that future mechanism. And so the discussion will go on in the next year. We'll continue to be very constructive, very inclusive, to elaborate that mechanism. And so what I intend to present to the audience on Tuesday is where are we now on that work, and how can we continue working in order to make sure that the future mechanism is really responding to the priorities of basically the collective cyber resilience of all of the UN membership. So yeah, quite a program.
Quite a plan, quite an ambitious plan, but definitely touching upon, again, many terms, let's say, many formulas that do cover all the basically how broad is the scope of actual today's talks in general on cybersecurity, and then as a consequence in this more specific field of like cyber diplomacy within that domain. With today's guests also in terms of experiences and learnings and also contributions from everywhere in the world, basically, to the Summer School of Cyber Diplomacy. We are representing with Ambassador Peguero, the Dominican Republic, and with Alban, we're representing France. Something that I would like to know, and that is a bit connected to what we were talking about before in terms of the experience that you've had with the Summer School so far, is if you look back to the past year, let's say, respectively, in your own work and in your own countries and your own talks. First of all, I would like to know if there is something, for example, that maybe you had heard at the previous summer school that made you think again, let's say, to it, or maybe that you incorporated and that came to be, let's say, a salient topic throughout this past year of work that you had. But also at the same time, what instead has changed in terms of topics, in your opinion, comparing, for example, what was going on a year ago and instead 1 year later, cybersecurity and cyber diplomacy. What is it about? What has changed? How would you both, let's say, describe a little bit this experience of the past year?
I think something that struck me over the last year is how all the dimensions of cybersecurity are interconnected. That's something that throughout the week of the Tallinn Summer School last year, we could see very clearly, because the different sessions, they show you different sides of how is cyber diplomacy organized, and to what issues we are responding, and how do we try to address them. In terms of the emerging trends that we see and the new topics, I think something that's been gaining quite a lot of traction is the discussion around emerging disruptive technologies, and I'm thinking especially on AI. So this is a topic France is quite engaged on. We have the upcoming AI Action Summit in February of 2025, and those emerging topics, they also demonstrate that we actually need to be in a continuous learning approach, us cyber diplomats, and also that the framework in which we work needs to have the flexibility to adapt to those new developments that can have positive impacts, but also, of course, adverse impacts that can also be anticipated. So yeah, I think this is why we're really trying to make progress in a constructive way, as I was explaining before, in terms of having a very inclusive dialogue going on, in order to have that flexibility to be able to adapt to those developments.
On digital, I believe there's been a lot of new things, like Alban just said, with all this AI discussion and regulations and negotiations of conventions and so on. It is sort of new from the summer school of last year. On cyber, again, if we make that division, I wouldn't say that things have changed other than the evolution of the emerging threats. But the core of it, I think, it has evolved. If we take the cybercrime side, then it has evolved because now we have a convention, at least let's say that before December, it's the final draft of the convention that was agreed by consensus on the ad hoc committee, which should be now become officially adopted by the AG in December and open for signature. So that will be a new development. And on the rest, I think it's been a discussion that's been going on for many years now, which is why Alban mentioned in the previous question that we are looking for a permanent mechanism that is more action oriented, and then we can get more results out of it instead of forever discussing on how exactly are we gonna apply the international law to cyberspace and so on. Because again, we've been discussing this for like 20 years. But I think it's at least consistently evolving. The one thing that I like about the evolution of this is that more and more member states are having people specializing in this. So it's now you have a more active participation by states. Now they are, thanks to initiatives like this cyber diplomacy school, now you have people engaging instead of just being there, the whatever delegate you have for the first committee, just sitting there and taking notes and sending notes back to Capital. Now you have a more active engagement by member states that we did not have, for example, even in 2019 when the resolution for the ad hoc committee passed. It was a very different scenario in the room than what we have right now. So I think this evolution has a lot to do with these capacity building initiatives.
Would you say, or would anyone say, whoever likes to respond to this, that capacity building brings about further capacity building? In the sense, is there some sort of a network expansion effect once you actually start bringing in expertise, let's say, in a ministry or in a certain government department on a specific topic like cyber diplomacy, let's say, and then as a consequence you start seeing also around what are the other departments of potential application of this, and how actually the topic of cybersecurity and as a consequence also cyber diplomacy has this transversal, let's say, flair to it. In a sense, it is something that cuts across different domains and different areas of government. Ambassador Peguero.
No, absolutely. It is. This is a truly transversal subject, and the point of this capacity building, the way we're approaching this with other projects like LAC4, is building into our diplomatic school this basic, at least basic program. So basically now we're doing continued education training for our current diplomats in all areas, because it's obviously we're prioritizing the multilateral. We're prioritizing our missions to the UN, to the OAS, to the EU in Brussels, and so on. Geneva, but also bilaterally. Now, I think, and with time, it'll be even more transversal than in any discussion of anything. You will have a component that will touch upon cyber, so you need that diplomat there to have the tools to be able to engage in that. So the way we're in the Dominican Republic dealing with that is trying, again, apart from these specific trainings, we're trying to build into the basic curricula of the diplomatic school these basic elements of cyber diplomacy, so that every single diplomat that goes through the school will have that basic toolkit, let's say, or tool set to be able to engage in that. But it is absolutely something that will keep on expanding.
Alban, from your point of view, what would you say on this? And is it something that you've seen not only actually within the French government, but I would say that maybe you have detected or understood also as something that is happening in other governments, or like with other representatives of other countries, simply in sessions maybe, or like meetings that you had with them?
Yeah, no, I think what is quite clear is that at the scale of the history of diplomacy, cyber is a relatively new topic. And that means that the specialty that is cyber diplomacy and cybersecurity in general is actually being built right now. It's a work in progress. So in that sense, the fact that it's such a new topic, and also, as we touched upon earlier, it's an evolving topic. So it also means that we need to keep updating our knowledge and our approach to cyber issues. It means that indeed it should be a priority to consolidate that specialty in terms of human resources, in terms of knowledge management, and also in terms of bridging the technical community and the diplomatic community, as the ambassador was saying earlier. I think for us diplomats, it's always very interesting to talk to colleagues that have more of a technical background, because even though we're not going to be able to understand 100%, even if we get 50%, that's better than zero, and it allows us to then really grasp the issues that we are trying to solve, and also to identify where the technical community and stakeholders in general need to be included in those discussions, because they have expertise, that's for sure. They also have responsibilities, so it's part of how do we conduct that dialogue.
The summer school, obviously, as we said, has exactly the goal and the program to address diplomatic discussions, but also like challenges that regard several topics such as state-sponsored cyber operations and cybercrime, but also the impacts of emerging technologies like AI. But I would like to get back to something that we were addressing before, which is the community aspect next to the capacity building aspect of the cyber diplomacy summer school. What does that mean? Ambassador, I would start from you with wrapping up this episode and your take on this, because obviously the need for a cohesive international collaboration and governance on these topics is also highlighted basically by the Cyber Diplomacy Summer School program itself. It also seems quite natural, let's say, to talk about networks and cyber diplomacy, because I would say that diplomacy, also in the cyber sphere, is based on exactly also having networks and building networks. Within this context and this framework, how would you say that the summer school positions itself, let's say, in order to foster exactly this collaboration and resilience at an actual international level of the international community?
I think going back to the network part, it's definitely essential part, because at the end of the day, this is all about collaboration. This is all about international cooperation, and it is precisely because of that borderless nature of the cyberspace that we need all this in the first place. We are talking about doing some sort of alumni network in which then we can go on exchanging not only at the floor, because we do anyways, like at the UN, for example, because many of us are the people on the ground on the OEWG or other fora. But there's been, again, plans about building a formal alumni network that could maybe evolve beyond being just alumni from the summer cyber diplomacy school, but also bring people from other capacity building programs or from other even not capacity building programs, but from MFAs and so on. And maybe we can then build a big network of cyber diplomats, like we have, for example, with cybercrime. We have a lot of networks of cyber investigators, of cyber prosecutors, of the 24/7 point of contact networks, and so on. And then speaking about contact points, I think also this would tap into the efforts that we've been doing in the UN and previous to that in the OAS for our region, to have diplomatic points of contacts as well in these point of contact directors.
Alban, your take, and with you we head to the conclusion of this episode.
Maybe to get back on how at the UN level we can also foster that inclusive network among member states, because in the end we share the same concerns when it comes to cyber threats, and being able to actually implement the UN framework for responsible state behavior. I think that's always been the objective of the program of action proposal that was put forward a few years ago. It's this idea of creating and fostering cooperation, but also doing so in an action-oriented manner in order to make sure that those efforts are action-oriented in the sense that they contribute to our collective cyber resilience and to the stability of cyberspace. And I think it's really the overarching objective that we share and that the Tallinn School of Cyber Diplomacy is aiming for. And that's why it's very interesting to hear that those efforts are going to continue. And I think they're very complementary, all the different levels, being global, multilateral. The effort that can be done at the national scale, regional scale, the OIS, the OSCE, for instance, all of that comes together in order to really foster that cooperation, that stability, and that cyber resilience. And yeah, we still have work to do in that regard.
Alban, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Federico.
Ambassador Peguero, thanks a lot to you as well for joining us.
Thanks to you, Federico. It was a great talk.
And thanks a lot also to all our listeners. Don't forget, first of all, to check out the program of the Tallinn Cyber Diplomacy Summer School, which we will include in the podcast blog that always comes attached with the episodes of the Digital Government Podcast. And that's it instead from your moderators for today.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.